Hi, my name is Ishan Shukla, and today we'll be talking about negative externalities and pollution and how that has an effect on society. Here's our total table of contents. The author's presentation will first go to the introduction, negative externalities, cause and effect, real world situation, some policy solution, and finally a summary. So firstly, what is an externality? Well, an externality is a cost or benefit of an economic activity experienced by an unrelated third party. Externalities can be either positive or negative, and they occur from either production or consumption usually. Now there's two different types of externalities. There's positive externalities and negative externalities. Positive externality is when consuming or producing a good causes a benefit to a third party. For example, education or subsidies. Negative externalities, on the other hand, is when consuming or producing a good causes a cost to a third party. For example, pollution and taxes. Now, what is our pollution problem? Well, in a perfectly competitive market, firms and consumers base their decision on private costs. These include wages, materials, and things like that, and private benefits. So private benefits include profit or saving utilities. Now, in the case of pollution, firms ignore external costs. So essentially, they're just trying to maximize their revenue as much as possible. So they forget external costs like carbon emission affecting public health. As a result, goods with pollutions are too cheap and too much to produce from a societal perspective. Companies will then produce more of that good, and eventually this will lead to pollution-intensive production. Consumers won't understand the true cost of this and will usually pay less than the true cost of making that good. Essentially, market fails to allocate efficiency, which leads to market failure. Here we have a negative externality diagram or a graph, which explains how negative externalities kind of work. There's three different lines we have to consider. There's the marginal private cost, which is essentially the cost by the producer for each additional unit produced. It's a standard supply curve, essentially, you can think of it as. Our marginal social cost. This reflects the true cost to society, including the externalities like pollution, like we talked about in the previous slide. It's higher than usually your marginal private cost because it includes private costs as well as external costs imposed on the company. And finally, we have our marginal social benefit. This is essentially, you can think of it as a demand curve, reflecting the value or benefit consumers get from consuming each additional unit. Now, what are these? What is the price and quantity, and why does that make such a difference? Well, there's four we have to consider. There's first our Q, which is our market equilibrium quantity. At this point, the market produced where MPC, so marginal private cost, equals your marginal social benefit. This is the unregulated market outcome where producers only consider private costs. So like I said, they only consider making their profits and reducing their costs. Then there's Q1, which is your socially optimal quantity. This is where your marginal social cost will equal your marginal social benefit. It's the amount society would prefer to be produced where external costs are considered. So things like pollution, like I said, are considered. Next, we have our prices. First, we have our P, which is just your market price. This is the price at an unregulated equilibrium, where your marginal private cost equals your marginal social benefit. And then we have our P1, which is our social optimal price, the higher price that includes the true cost of production, including externalities. Now, what happens when they both meet? Well, when your Q1 meets with your P1, this is when you have a socially optimal production. So this is including all the externalities such as pollution and negative externalities. And our regular one, which is our market outcome, is when Q meets with P. So this is essentially what the market would like to produce that, including just our private costs and our private benefits. Now the thing in the middle, the purple thing, the purple triangle, is known as a dead weight loss. This is essentially a loss of an economic efficiency that occurs when the market overproduces a good due to ignoring external costs. So essentially, when your private costs and your private benefits meet, the external cost essentially shifts the line, which we'll talk about later, to your marginal social costs, which creates this new triangle in between, which is the dead weight loss, which is the loss of efficiency in a market. Now, to correct this market failure, taxes, like we will talk about in the later slides, can shift the MPC upwards to the MC, the marginal social cost. And this aligns with private and social benefits, leading to a social optimal outcome, like we talked about. So, you guys may be wondering, why can't the company just overproduce and just make as much money as they want? Because their profits will be a lot more. Well, there are cause and effect of overproduction. Firstly, when a company produces, production itself causes pollution. So, things like energy and steel will generate pollution during production. Next, this will cause the external cost not being paid by the firm. So the pollution itself that the company created causes third-party harm. So things like health problem and environmental damage that the firm does not bear these costs. This will then lead to their private costs exceeding their social costs. So like I said, firms will make decisions based on only their marginal private costs, ignoring marginal external costs. This will then lead to overproduction occurring. So because these firms don't pay their external damages, the price itself is way too low and the quantity is way too high. This will then lead to inefficiency and deadweight loss. So the extra unit produced beyond societal optimal causes net harm to society. So things like health problems and diseases. Now let's take a look at how this kind of plays into the real world. Let's look at two major cities we have here, where negative externalities from pollution are especially visible. First, in Los Angeles, car traffic is a leading source of nitrogen oxide and fine particulate matter, aka pollution. In Los Angeles, traffic dropped over 40% in 2020, so during the COVID era, but ozone pollution fell only 15%. As a result, people suffer more asthma and heart disease, leading to healthcare cost increases. So another thing that affects society. Similarly, in India's industrial zone, such as Kanpur or areas surrounding Delhi, heavily rely on coal and outdated technologies. These firms will emit pollutions far beyond what is efficient for society. But because they don't pay for those external damages, they just keep overproducing and pollute excessively. In India, industrial pollution accounts for almost 51% of country's air pollution, which is crazy. In both cases, we observe a classic market failure. Producers and consumers make decisions based on only private costs, ignoring a broader social harm. Now, like I talked about before, there are ways to help this problem. The first, we will look at Pognavian taxes. Now, what is this? Well, Pognavian tax is a tax imposed on activities that generate negative externalities, aiming to correct market inefficiency by internalizing external costs associated with those activities. So essentially, they put a tax on those overproducing production, which cause pollution. For example, carbon tax. So the more you produce, the more taxes you have to pay. You can think this as an external cost, which I'll explain in this diagram to the right. This graph shows that the pollution causes the marginal social cost to lie above the marginal private cost. A market produces at Q essentially, but the optimal amount is Q1. A Pognavian tax essentially raises that firm cost to align with the marginal social cost. So essentially, it moves the quantity from Q to Q1 and price from P to P1, moving the market towards an efficient outcome. The purple triangle, or the triangle that you see, like I talked about, is the dead weight loss. So essentially the societal inefficiency from overproduction. As you can see, this lowers the amount produced but increases the prices. Now, you may think that why is this is just bad because they're just, you know, underproducing and just causing more to produce. Well, this does have benefits. The first benefit is it aligns with private and social costs. It reduces overproduction and emission, and it generates government revenue that they can later use. Apart from taxes, there are all alternative policy options, which both have pros and cons. We'll look at three. First, we have command and control. This is where government sets emission level. The pro to this is you'll see quick results and it's easy to reinforce, but the con is it may be inefficient and rigged. Cap and trade. This is where firms trade pollution permits. The pro to this is it's cost effective and it incentivizes tech, but a con to this is it may be hard to monitor initially. And finally, we have subsidies for clean tech. So this is essentially supporting clean alternatives. A pro to this is it promotes innovation, so promotes companies to do good. And the con to this is it's heavily reliant on taxpayers, so taxpayers pay a lot more money. And finally, to summarize everything up, negative externalities are like pollution and distort market outcomes. Pollution leads to overproduction and inefficiency, and this causes welfare losses like deadweight loss. But this can be helped with tools like taxes, permit, and regulation to help the social optimal level. Thank you. Here's my reference. Thank you.